Battle of Missouri, how a battle changed Missouri forever. Picture Missouri in 1861. It wasn't just another state, it was the geographical jackpot of the Civil War. Why? Because of two mighty rivers, the Missouri and the Mississippi. These rivers weren't just pretty streams for fishing, they were the superhighways of the 19th century. Whoever controlled them controlled the flow of grain, cattle, timber, and troops. Think of them as Amazon Prime delivery routes, except instead of packages, you're shipping cannons and gunpowder. The Union knew that if the Confederacy got its hands on Missouri's waterways, it would be like giving your enemy the keys to your warehouse. The Confederacy knew the same. Thus, Missouri became the gateway to the West, and everyone wanted the password. Now let's talk about the man who wanted to drag Missouri into the Confederate camp. Claiborne Fox Jackson. Born in Kentucky in 1806, Jackson moved to Missouri as a young man, where he built a career in politics. He was a classic Southern gentleman type, fond of states' rights, deeply pro-slavery, and convinced that Missouri's destiny was tied to the South. By the time he became governor in January 1861, he was already plotting how to pull Missouri out of the Union. Jackson was the kind of man who could smile politely while secretly writing letters to Confederate officials asking for guns. He believed Missouri's rivers and location made it too valuable to waste on the Union. In his mind, Missouri was meant to be a Confederate jewel. But here's where Jackson's grand scheme hit a brick wall. In February 1861, the Missouri State Convention gathered to decide the state's fate. Delegates came from across Missouri, farmers, merchants, lawyers, and even German immigrants who had fled Europe's revolutions. Many of them weren't exactly fans of Abraham Lincoln, but they were practical. They looked at Missouri's economy and saw that the state's trade ties to the north were far stronger than its ties to the south. Railroads connected Missouri to Chicago, and St. Louis merchants thrived on northern markets. Cutting those ties would be like sawing off the branch you're sitting on. So when Jackson pleaded for secession, the delegates basically said, "Nice try, Governor, but we're not about to bankrupt ourselves for your Confederate daydreams." The vote was overwhelming. Missouri would remain in the Union. This wasn't just a casual decision. It was a line in the sand. Missouri's convention delegates understood that secession meant war, and war meant devastation. They also knew that Missouri's population was split. For every plantation owner waving a Confederate flag, there were German immigrants and small farmers ready to fight for the Union. Choosing the Union was a way to prevent Missouri from becoming a battlefield. Or so they thought. Of course, Jackson didn't take no for an answer. He kept scheming, which led directly to the Camp Jackson affair and the Battle of Booneville. But that February vote was the moment Missouri's destiny tilted toward the Union, even if the road ahead was bloody and chaotic. Jackson, pacing like a frustrated gambler who just lost his last coin, muttering about Missouri's destiny. Delegates rolling their eyes, whispering, "Destiny? More like bankruptcy if we follow this guy." Meanwhile, the rivers flowed on, indifferent to politics, carrying barges of corn and whiskey while men argued about the fate of the nation. It was high drama with a touch of farce, because in the end, Missouri didn't secede, but thanks to Jackson's stubbornness, it still became one of the most violent, divided states of the Civil War. So, Missouri in 1861 wasn't just a state, it was a battleground of ideas, loyalties, and rivers. And Governor Claiborne Jackson? He was the man who tried to turn Missouri into a Confederate stronghold, only to be outvoted, outmaneuvered, and eventually chased out of his own capital. Governor Claiborne Fox Jackson had just been humiliated. The February 1861 Missouri Convention had told him, in no uncertain terms, "No, sir, we're not seceding." For Jackson, this was like being voted off the island in the first round of Survivor. But Jackson wasn't the type to pack up and go home. Instead, he turned to secret correspondence with Confederate leaders. Imagine him hunched over a desk by candlelight, scribbling letters like, "Dear Confederacy, Missouri totally loves you. Please send guns, hugs, and maybe a few cannons." He was plotting rebellion, convinced he could drag Missouri into the Confederate camp even if the people said otherwise. Now, every good drama needs a foil, and Jackson's came in the form of Captain Nathaniel Lyon. Lyon was fiery, stubborn, and about as subtle as a cannon blast. He commanded the St. Louis Arsenal, which was basically the Fort Knox of weapons in Missouri. Lyon suspected Jackson's militia at Camp Jackson was planning to seize those weapons, and Lyon wasn't about to wait around for proof. He believed in the philosophy of shoot first, ask questions later, and if anyone complains, remind them you saved the Union. On May 10, 1861, Lyon made his move. He surrounded Camp Jackson with Union troops and demanded surrender. The militia, caught off guard, gave up without much of a fight. But Lyon wasn't done. He ordered the prisoners marched through the streets of St. Louis. Now picture this: hundreds of captured militia, unarmed, trudging through the city. Crowds of angry civilians shouting insults, throwing rocks, and demanding answers. Tensions boiling over until, bang, shots rang out. Civilians fell, chaos erupted, and St. Louis turned into a war zone. The Camp Jackson affair didn't calm Missouri, it lit it on fire. Neighbors stopped speaking, families split, and the state slid closer to civil war. After the riot, Union General William S. Harney tried to negotiate with Jackson. The idea was simple: let's avoid turning Missouri into a battlefield. But Jackson wanted Confederate backing, not compromise. The talks collapsed faster than a bad poker hand. Jackson fled Jefferson City, gathering pro-Confederate recruits as he retreated westward. He imagined himself leading a glorious rebel army. In reality, he was dragging together a ragtag band of farmers with rusty muskets. Meanwhile, Lyon had been promoted to brigadier general. And if Jackson thought he could outrun him, he was sorely mistaken. Lyon pursued Jackson with relentless determination. He knew that if Jackson linked up with Confederate forces in Arkansas or Texas, Missouri could be lost. Lyon wasn't about to let that happen. On June 17, 1861, Lyon finally caught Jackson near Booneville. Lyon had 1,700 Union troops. Jackson had about 500 militia, most of whom looked more like weekend farmers than soldiers. The battle was short, barely half an hour. On June 17, 1861, near Booneville, Missouri, the stage was set. Nathaniel Lyon had about 1,700 Union troops, disciplined, armed, and ready. Claiborne Jackson had about 500 militia, half trained, half equipped, and half ready to run home. The battle lasted barely 30 minutes. That's shorter than most modern football games, but the stakes were infinitely higher. Jackson's men broke almost immediately. Some dropped muskets, others sprinted across fields, and a few probably thought, you know what, farming wasn't so bad after all. Jackson's men broke and fled, leaving Lyon victorious. This wasn't just a skirmish. Lyon's win secured the Missouri River, the lifeline of the state. With it, the Union controlled Missouri's future. Lyon's victory wasn't just about chasing Jackson's militia. It was about securing the Missouri River. This river was the lifeline of Missouri, the artery through which supplies, reinforcements, and gunboats could flow. Control of the river meant the Union could move troops and goods freely, while the Confederacy was left stranded. Think of it like owning the only highway in town. The Union now had the toll booth, the keys, and the map. The Confederacy had hoped Missouri would become a stronghold, a gateway to the West, a place to spread influence and supplies. Booneville crushed that dream. Jackson's retreat westward became less of a grand march and more of a desperate scramble. The Confederacy's chance to anchor Missouri slipped away like water through fingers. Now don't think Missouri suddenly became peaceful. Far from it. Guerrilla warfare erupted. Bands of bushwhackers and Union militias clashed in bloody skirmishes. Families were torn apart, one brother in blue, another in gray. Communities fractured, loyalties tested, and the scars lasted long after 1865. Missouri became one of the Civil War's most violent frontiers, a place where the war was fought not just on battlefields, but in backyards. The Battle of Booneville is often overshadowed by bigger clashes like Wilson's Creek, August 1861, where Lyon himself would fall in battle. Pea Ridge, March 1862, a massive fight that cemented Union control of Arkansas and Missouri. But Booneville mattered. It was the first domino, the proof that Lyon's aggressive leadership could secure Missouri for the Union. For ordinary Missourians, this wasn't just politics, it was personal. Families split down the middle, with fathers and sons fighting on opposite sides. Communities fractured, suspicion ran rampant, and violence seeped into daily life. Even after the war ended, Missouri carried scars, emotional, political, and physical, that lingered for generations. The Battle of Booneville was not just a skirmish. It was a decisive moment in the fight for Missouri's soul. It showed how swiftly the balance of power could shift, how rivers could decide the fate of nations, and how one man's determination, Nathaniel Lyon's, could alter the course of history. Missouri's Civil War story is one of divided loyalties, bitter struggles, and the high stakes of America's most defining conflict.